remains to be seen. Okay. I think I'm here. I think we're good. Time to get started. I'm sorry that I've been away. My computer went out. I had to replace my motherboard, unfortunately. But we're back, baby. Everything looks like it's running good. Alright, we're just going to jump right into it then. So obviously Syria has fallen. And the so-called moderate Syrian rebels are already slaughtering Christians and infidels, as I predicted, and I think as everybody with the brain predicted. Everybody knew as soon as Syria fell that no Christian in the country stood a chance. So, I do have some stuff I can show from Twitter, but there's a lot I'm going to have to be cautious on showing because there is a lot of horrible videos coming out of Syria of my fellow brothers and sisters in Christ getting beheaded and executed, and it's not cool. It's not cool at all. But we're going to start out. Scott Horton debated General Wesley Clark on the Piers Morgan show. We're going to listen to Piers Morgan's little opening here. Get into some of the Scott Horton and General Clark stuff and see where we go.
Trying to make sense of Bashar al-Assad's spectacular downfall in Syria. On the one hand, this was a popular and organic uprising against a brutal dictator. On the other, President Biden says that his demise is directly thanks to Israel and Ukraine for weakening Iran and Russia, backed all the way by the United States. Experts are now praising the reinvention and reformed vision of the man who led the rebellion. Battle-weary cynics are wondering when the US and its allies learned to trust a group with explicit links to al-Qaeda. Doubtless there are many cross wires here, and many of them lead in opposing directions to the United States and to Russia. Over the next hour, we're going to untangle them with the help of two guests who are returning by popular demand. Last week, we had an illuminating debate about the United States' role in Ukraine's war. Two guests in particular felt they had more to discuss with each other, and the audience agreed. Scott Horton is the author of Provoked, How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine. Wesley Clark retired as a four-star general after 38 years in the US Army, serving as a Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for coming back and facing off against each other. After that last debate last week, which was fascinating, there was a lot of response from, as you know, I think both of you, from a lot of people who watched it saying, what I would really like to see is Scott Horton and General Clark going at it one-to-one and really trying to get some clarity about
Thanks for the like.
Differences of opinion over this. So that's why we've got you back together, and I appreciate you agreeing to do this. I would say that, General Clark, I gave you a lot of time the other day deliberately because I found what you were saying were fascinating. Here, if we can, I'd like to keep the responses slightly trimmer so that we can get a more of a debate going than people talking perhaps for too long in one slab. So with that in mind, let me start with you, Scott. I want to start with Syria. We are going to come to Ukraine, which is the main purpose of getting you back together. But on Syria...
Piers, will you get to the point? He is taking forever. Like, I just... Let him talk, dude. Like, you don't have to give an hour monologue.
What is your view about what has really happened here?
Well, obviously, you have what amounted to a secular dictatorship there that... you know, they had some phony elections from time to time, but essentially it was a strong-arm dictatorship that obviously, when it came down to it, lacked the popular support that they needed to stay in power. But I'm extremely worried about the near-term and medium-term future here because the group that has taken over, HTS, really is al-Qaeda in Iraq, in Syria.
And they literally are al-Qaeda. I will show some clips and some evidence of this. So far, it's not pretty. There are a lot of infidels and Christians that are currently being slaughtered en masse in Syria right now. These are not good people. Anybody celebrating this are not good people. Either you're uneducated or you're simply evil. These people are not good people. We should not be celebrating the overthrow of Assad right now. Regardless of what you think of Assad, I guarantee you the people who just took over are much worse.
Their leader, Jolani, announced, he said, "We are the Mujahideen." This is what he said in his speech at the mosque, and we have taken over the country. This is a man who literally fought against Americans in Fallujah in Iraq War II and was sent by the leader of al-Qaeda in Iraq, then renamed the Islamic State of Iraq, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, to go and start the war in Syria in 2011, or to take over the war. And in fact, Victoria Nuland was the State Department spokesman at the time, or spokeswoman, and she put out a statement saying that people should know Jabhat al-Nusra is just an alias for al-Qaeda in Iraq. That's what they are, al-Qaeda in Iraq in Syria. And American and allied support for al-Nusra and the Free Syrian Army and associated groups, Jaish al-Islam and others, back 10 years ago, it backfired, because instead of everyone marching west toward Damascus, they went east and they consolidated a state in eastern Syria, and then eventually they conquered all of western Iraq, creating the caliphate and necessitating Iraq War III. Now that
So I don't know if people remember this, but if you remember back in the 2015-2016 campaign with Donald Trump repeatedly said on the campaign trail, Obama created ISIS, Obama created ISIS. He was like 100% correct. Obama and the State Department did create ISIS. They literally fueled them, and that's why ISIS rose in the region and took over a bunch of places, is because we were the ones giving them the weapons to do so. Part of this Syrian rebel group who just toppled Assad are the same people. Now, a lot of them were killed under Trump because Trump cut the funding and took the war to them. But a lot of these people survived, and then they rebuilt, they regrew, and now they've been supplied by the CIA again. So here we are.
That was under Baghdadi, who had split from Jolani, and Jolani is now clearly under the public relations care of the West, and is taking their advice to moderate his positions. However, he's now in charge of a country full of millions of Shiite Arabs and secular Sunnis, Christians of all different descriptions, and people who are certainly not going to be welcome to help rule the regime with him, and may very well be under threat, and it remains to be seen.
Unfortunately, since Scott Horton recorded this video with Piers Morgan, it has already been seen. He said it remains to be seen what happens to these people. Well, now we know, because we're getting videos out of Syria of them being executed or forced to convert, etc., etc. The Kurds are being executed. Any Muslim groups that are against them are being executed. Christians are being executed. I got countless videos that I've already watched. I probably won't be able to sleep for weeks. It's pretty horrible. And obviously I can't show a lot of it on here. I do have it bookmarked. I could pull it up, but then my channel's going to get nuked. But unfortunately, when Scott Horton recorded this video, he was basically foreshadowing what was coming.
How well he will be able to control his new legions, who truly are bin Ladenite terrorists, the Mujahideen, in his own words.
General Clark, I mean, my understanding of the situation is not too dissimilar to what Scott has just laid out. I mean, this guy who's now running the rebels and taken over is somebody who was part of al-Qaeda. It's more complex, and he's trying to move away from the more extremist elements of that part of his past. But would you take issue with Scott's framing of where this now is in Syria?
He's going to take issue because he completely supported Obama 100%. He was an Obama lapdog and completely was helping them fund the CIA ops in Syria that created this mess, even though he was a harsh Bush critic who was against the Iraq war, but was okay when it was Obama taking it to Syria. So let's listen to what old General Clark has to say. I highly doubt he's going to agree with Scott Horton.
Not much issue.
Yeah.
I'm completely surprised by that. I thought he was going to argue. That's actually very surprising, because when Obama was president, this guy would go everywhere talking about how great Obama's foreign policy was, knowing that Obama was the one funding these terrorist groups in Syria to topple Assad. So it's very surprising that he's like, yeah, I don't have it. Yeah, that's what happened. Well, great to know. Great to know.
I would tell you this, Piers, that when you're looking at this region, you can never exclude the role of states in the region. They finance the terrorists. Different states finance different groups of terrorists, and
AKA America.
ISIS actually had relations, had talked to Turkey and the Kurds before they went into Mosul. At least that's what I'm informed by people in the region who were in a position to know. So these states aren't strangers to this. I see Turkey's hand behind this.
Oh, it's just Turkey. It's just Turkey, General Clark. It's just Turkey. Don't worry. I have the wiki pulled up. Nope, to never trust Wikipedia. But I'm going to prove that America is behind this. Just like Scott Horton knows that America is behind this. Not just Turkey. We're not just going to blame Turkey for the toppling of Syria. Get out of here. And I'm not going to get into Israel right now. Obviously, Israel has a hand in it. I mean, Netanyahu was so giddy announcing the fact that Assad had fled. But I really don't feel like getting my channel nuked. So we're just going to blame America right now.
President Erdogan, for a long time, has had expanded visions in the region. You know, Syria and Lebanon and Palestine were all under the Ottoman Empire, and Erdogan has ambitions to be a greater stabilizing force in the region. Let's put it that way. And you know, we've used and abused the Kurds for the last 50 years.
You can see Scott Horton just wants to.
Saddam Hussein, we abandoned them, we used them again, we supported them, and now they're at risk again, and we've got U.S. troops in there with them, and there was fighting between some Turkish-supported Syrian National Army troops and the Syria Democratic Front, which we're supporting. And so this is a really unsettled situation. We just don't know how it's going to turn out.
And before I go,
one thing though that is good, at least thus far, is that they've said the government of Syria should stay in place and the army should stay in place. And they learned more maybe from our experience in Iraq. But when you're going to go in and take over, you don't immediately destroy all the authority.
Right.
Who has control of the intelligence? Because this is going to be a lot of score settling here.
Yeah, I mean, Scott, a Lebanese friend of mine said to me today, if you look at Iran after the Shah was deposed, if you look at Iraq after Saddam was deposed, if you look at almost Libya with Gaddafi, if you look at the history in the last few decades of dictators being deposed, or alleged dictators, that the future can often be as bad, if not worse, certainly in the aftermath for a few years. I mean,
agreed.
I mean,
listen, I'd like to go back, Piers, to something that General Clark is probably most famous for in the world, more than even the Serbia war, is.
I knew he was about to do this. He's going to bring up the time General Clark basically talked about the letter that one of the staffers came up to him. Is like, we're going into Iraq. Sir, it's much worse than this. We're not just going to Iraq. We have a plan for the next 5 years to topple Libya, Sudan, Syria, Iran is the final one. That's what he's about to bring up.
His statement from 2002 about a secret plan that he had seen in Donald Rumsfeld's Pentagon to take out 7 countries in 5 years. And that plan, that's the neoconservatives' plan. That's the Wolfowitz, Richard Perle doctrine. And it was based on the thinking of Perle and David Wormser, the clean break strategy from 1996. And what they said, it's a little bit complicated, but what they said was Israel's problem is Hezbollah on their northern border. And what they wanted to do was dump Oslo and take the Palestinian territories. But they couldn't do that as long as they had a threat from Hezbollah on their northern border. And they said the problem is Hezbollah is armed by Iran by way of Syria. And then nonsensically, Pierce, they said the way to solve this was to get rid of Saddam Hussein, secular Sunni Saddam Hussein, the roadblock in the Shiite crescent. Get rid of him, and David Wormser and Richard Perle thought that would give Turkey and Jordan dominance over the Iraqi Shia supermajority, and then they would have the Iraqi clergy tell Hezbollah to stop being friends with Iran and be nice with Israel. Well, that didn't work at all. And Iraq War II was a disaster. It put Iran's best friends in power in Baghdad, the Supreme Islamic Council, the Dawa Party, and their great advisor, the Ayatollah Sistani. That's who rules Baghdad now because of Iraq War II. So then they launched a policy,
and that goes without mentioning the fact that Afghanistan is now ruled by the Taliban. So basically what we've done is we've toppled these regimes, and we've basically installed Western-hating, CIA-backed terrorists that we created into these places, and now it's terrorist-ruled. They've become even closer to Iran. Everything we've done has been a complete disaster, and yet we're still doing it. We're still doing it. And I don't agree with everything with Scott Horton. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to get into my disagreements with him. But he is spot on almost everything of our geopolitical nonsense and disasters that we've had in the Middle East. He has a point. He has a point. And I'm not going to get into the Israel part. Like I said, I want to keep my channel. And Israel just becomes a big mess, and I'm tired of dealing with it. But I would like to talk about my own country's involvement in these wars. I'll let the Israelis handle their own government. I want to talk about my own government and our participation in these regime changes. I don't like it. I don't want to be a part of it. I want to be done with it. Now, I understand the Israel part. I understand. It's just, I'm worried about my country. I'm worried about pulling my country out of this. And the Israel is a separate conversation about that. I know it's all intertwined. But to save my channel and to keep the bombardment of people away from me who constantly want to fight about Israel. Because once you mention Israel, any discussion we can have just goes into chaos. You can't have a conversation because everybody is so freaking, I'm on this side, and let's just fight about it. Can't even mention it without having all kinds of nonsense happen. I'm trying to avoid that. I just want to talk about American foreign policy and why this is a disaster. And I also want to mention, I kind of want to touch on the fact that a bunch of Christians are about to die because of our actions. That's what I'm worried about. I'm a Christian. Okay? I'm worried about my fellow brothers and sisters in Christ that are currently being mass executed because of our foreign policy.
everyone, I beg you to read this. It's Seymour Hersh in the New Yorker magazine. It's called The Redirection, and it's from 2007. And what it is Khalil Zad and Abrams, two card-carrying neoconservatives, they said, we screwed up. We just put Iran's best friends in power in Baghdad. Now we have to try to make up for that fact by overthrowing Bashar al-Assad in Syria. And this policy was adopted by W. Bush before Barack Obama ever came to town. And if you go back, and I document this in my previous book, Enough Already, if you go back and look at the dawn of the intervention in the Syria war in 2011 and 12, it was the neoconservative war party that puts Israel first, that said, yes, we should support even bin Ladenites, even after September 11th, even after Iraq War II, where they killed 4,000 of our guys, of the 4,500 who died in Iraq War II, because they hate the Shiites more. They hate Iran, now Baghdad, Damascus, which is Alawite but allied with Iran, of course, and Hezbollah. That's the neoconservatives' enemy, is the Shiite alliance. But it wasn't Hezbollah that knocked our towers down. That was the bin Ladenites. They weren't sent by Iran, Iraq, or Syria, the axis of evil. They were from our allied states. They hated us because we were too close to Saudi Arabia and Egypt. So here we are. It's America's Sunni alliance versus Iran's Shiite alliance. And America is back on the side of al-Qaeda, and because of the interests of a foreign power. And quite frankly, it's true.
This goes so far back. Al-Qaeda is basically just a spawn from the Mujahideen. And this guy who just basically took over Syria is literally calling himself Mujahideen. That's Al-Qaeda. They're the same thing. Al-Qaeda is a spawn from the Mujahideen that we basically created during the Soviet era. I mean, this mess, man, it goes way back. And he's completely correct.
Treason. Joe Biden announced he's going to give aid to the new bin Ladenite government in Damascus now, yesterday. It's incredible, but that's the answer. That's why.
Okay. I want to play, out of fairness to General Clark, I want to play the clip that Scott referenced there of you back from 2002. So let's listen to this.
Right after 9/11, about 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who had used to work for me, and one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do."
And they all laugh.
So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
General Clark, aside from the fact that you have aged extremely well since that clip, given we're 22 years later, so congratulations on your gene pool. When you hear yourself talking then,
I mean, he kind of has, considering how old he is, he kind of has aged pretty well. That is pretty wild.
you sound almost incredulous about what you were learning there. What do you feel about it?
Actually, when it started, Piers, is 1991. I went in to see Undersecretary Wolfowitz in May of 91. He told me, I said, "You got to be proud of how the troops have done in the Gulf War, right?" He said, "Yeah, but President Bush said they're going to get rid of Saddam." He said, "I don't think that's going to happen." He said, "But we've got maybe 5 to 10 years to get rid of all these old Soviet surrogate countries, governments like Iraq and Syria and Libya and so forth before the next great superpower comes along." I said, 5 to 10 years, we're going to attack them? And he said, "Well," and then I said, "Who's the next superpower? Is it China?" He said, "Well," and then he sort of faded off like it's just a Friday afternoon. I don't want to think about it anymore. But they actually put together a plan. They took it apparently to Brent Scowcroft, who was George H. Bush's national security advisor. And General Scowcroft said, "Let's hold on this until after the election." The election didn't work out for them. They left. I came into the Pentagon in the spring of '94. They said, "What's the national security strategy?" I said, "I don't know, but what about the stuff that Wolfowitz was proposing?" Nobody'd ever heard of it. It got resurrected in a study that was paid for by the Israelis, Richard Pearl, and that's the study that said that if you want to protect Israel and you want Israel to succeed and have peace negotiations work, then you've got to get rid of the states that are surrounding on the periphery that are preventing.
So basically topple every Islamic Arabic regime surrounding Israel. Like I said, I'm not going to get into the intricacies of Israel. I want to save my channel. But yeah. In order to protect Israel, we got to basically topple every regime surrounding Israel. The problem with that is every time you topple one of these regimes, a worse regime is installed. A regime that hates Israel even more. So I don't understand. This ain't working out, guys. This ain't working out.
Yasser Arafat from making an agreement. And so this led to all that followed. So I'm not that far off. It's just that, right now, I don't know for sure exactly whether the Sunni terrorists that comprise HTS have changed their spots. I don't really see I don't know their independence from Turkey. My guess would be that President Erdogan helped them, maneuvered them around. He certainly was the first
with
national
aid from
leader
the
to
CIA.
speak out on their behalf. I suspect that Turkey told Russia, don't worry about your bases there. We'll protect them. You can stay. But you remember when this first started, Russia was bombing, and then they stopped. And that's when the state-to-state discussions began. And I think there was a sort of agreement on this. Russia would like to get its troops back so it can handle Ukraine anyway. It was just a little embarrassing for Russia, but they'd like to get their troops back, and they'd like to keep their bases. And Turkey would like to have.
I don't know if it's that embarrassing for Russia. I mean, Russia seemed to just not care. So, which tells me that there's some larger, much larger, deeper geopolitical strategy going on as far as Russia and China and Iran are concerned, because they just let Syria fall. Which, yes, they probably didn't want to expend the resources anymore to keep it. But there's something larger going on here. I mean, they seem relatively uninterested in the fact that Syria fell, which tells me that they have plans. I think Putin's going to try to take all of Ukraine. I think that's what's coming. And that's going to get crazy. It's going to get crazy.
Have greater influence in the region, and especially to work against the Kurds. And to do that, this is a sort of roundabout way to do it. And then they're sort of gambling that they can control the devils that they're working with in there. I don't know how this is going to work out, and I don't know what assistance the United States is going to provide, because we're working with the Syria Democratic Forces and the Kurds up there in the northeast, and that's probably not going to be a smooth relationship, at least initially.
Point that Scott made, which is it's almost beyond parody. That
no shit,
the United
Clark.
States is ending up now sending support to somebody who was Al-Qaeda's representative. I mean, there is a perversity to that, isn't there? I mean, Al-Qaeda, responsible for one of the worst terror attacks on American mainland in history, the worst, in fact. And now they're supporting the guy who was one of the key members of that organization.
Well, it's not like yes, it's always difficult. Look, there is Shia terrorism and there's Sunni terrorism. The Shia terrorism is normally state organized.
Does anybody ever realize how much he sounds like George Bush? You know how when George Bush Jr. started with that fake accent, which was obviously fake, but then it became his real accent because he did it so well. This guy sounds like Bush.
The Shia the Sunni terrorism is normally not state organized. It's independent of that. And so the United States has been working on a state-to-state basis. It's tried to restore the government in Iraq. It's going to try to help a government emerge in Syria. But underneath this, the United States, of course, has to be concerned about terrorism. And, it just remains to be seen.
The United States has to be concerned about the terrorism it created, is basically what he's saying.
It's the $64,000 question at this point is, who are these people?
Yeah.
Who are they listening to? Did they really change their spots?
Yeah, I completely agree. Let's move.
Dude, Scott's itching to be like, we know who these people are. We created them.
Move on to why I got you guys back together, because I found last week's debate about Ukraine fascinating. There have been developments since then. Both Donald Trump and President Zelensky, they've both come out now with statements, Scott, about, it looks to me like Trump is desperate to do a deal. He infers that Russia will want to do a deal because of the casualty rate on the battlefield in Ukraine, which is so bad for the Russians now. They're recruiting North Korean troops to come and join them.
Okay, it looks like they're done talking about Syria for now. I want to come back to the Ukraine stuff. We might come back and watch some more of that, but I want to go ahead. So think about this. Think about what we just watched. Now, Scott Horton didn't really get a lot of opportunity there to really get into details about how the CIA and America regime has been funding these moderate rebels inside of Syria that are now taking over Syria and are currently executing Christians and Muslims that do not agree with them, that are not ideologically aligned with them. So, if you're asking, really, Culper, really, is the CIA really funding the Syrian rebels? What proof do you have? Well, I don't know if you know what Wikipedia is. You know, Wikipedia, that is usually an arm of the state. But here you go. Operation Timber Sycamore was a I misspoke. Operation Timber Sycamore was a classified weapons supply and training program run by the United States Central Intelligence Agency and supported by the United Kingdom and some Arab intelligence services, including Saudi intelligence. The aim of the program was to remove Syrian President Bashar al-Assad from power. Launched in 2012 or 2013, it supplied money, weaponry, and training to Syrian opposition groups fighting Syrian government forces in the Syrian civil war. According to U.S. officials, the program was run by the CIA Special Activities Division and has trained thousands of rebels. President Barack Obama secretly authorized the CIA to begin arming Syria's embattled rebels in 2013. The program became public knowledge in mid-2016. One consequence of the program has been a flood of U.S. weapons, including assault rifles, mortars, and rocket-propelled grenades in the Middle East black market. Critics of the program within the Obama administration viewed it as an ineffective and expensive and raised concerns about seizure of weaponry by Islamic groups and about Timber Sycamore-backed rebels fighting alongside the al-Qaeda-affiliated al-Nusra Front and its allies, al-Nusra. So, keep telling me, keep coming at me and celebrating the fall of Bashar al-Assad, and it's like, okay, dude, we're not funding terrorist groups to take out Bashar al-Assad. That's not happening. It's literally public knowledge. Even Wikipedia has to talk about it. You remember when Trump was running for president and he kept saying Obama created ISIS? Obama created ISIS? Obama created ISIS? In July 2017, U.S. officials stated that Timber Sycamore would be phased out, with funds probably... I keep misspeaking. I'm reading too fast. In July 2017, U.S. officials stated that Timber Sycamore would be phased out, with funds possibly redirected to fighting the Islamic State. So in 2017, we redirected funds to fight the Islamic State, the same people that we created with those funds. That was when Trump took office. What Trump did is he cut funding to the CIA Black Ops Timber Sycamore bullshit and redirected it to fight the same people that Timber Sycamore created. Al-Qaeda isn't the only terrorist group that we were funding or that spawned from this. ISIS spawned from the weaponry and the supplies that we were giving to the Syrian rebels. That's why where ISIS was created, where it was found, it was in Syria. And now, the same Al-Qaeda terrorist group that we were funding in Timber Sycamore has now toppled Bashar al-Assad and taken over the country. The stated reason for Timber Sycamore, the aim of the program was to remove Syrian President Bashar al-Assad from power. So keep telling me we didn't fund terrorist groups to topple Bashar al-Assad when the entire world knows that we funded terrorist groups to topple Bashar al-Assad. Not only Wikipedia themselves, who are an arm of the state half the time, have a wiki page for it. So there you go. The Syrian rebels are a terrorist group. I'm sure there's some good Syrian rebels out there that really, really wanted to do what's best for their country. They're not the ones in control of this. They're not the ones in control of the opposition army. They're not the ones who just took power. The ones that just took power are an offshoot from Al-Qaeda. Basically, Al-Qaeda. They're really an offshoot of the Mujahideen. And Al-Qaeda is an offshoot of the Mujahideen. And now this Al-Nusra, or whoever they are an offshoot of Al-Qaeda. We funded terrorist groups to topple Bashar al-Assad. That was the stated goal of the Operation Timber Sycamore of the CIA. So yes, the CIA, not just Turkey, are the ones who toppled Bashar al-Assad. There you go. So stop fucking coming to me and telling me the CIA or America didn't topple Bashar al-Assad and we didn't fund terrorist groups to do it. Sorry, I got a little heated because I've had several people now tell me that we did not fund terrorist groups to topple Bashar al-Assad when it's literally a CIA program to do it. And it's the stated fucking purpose of it. There you go. So, what are the results of funding terrorist groups to topple regimes? What comes from that? What kind of things do you think happens when you fund a terrorist group, when you literally fund fucking Al-Qaeda to topple a government? What do you think happens? I'll give you a second to think about it. Anybody that comes and watches this, I'll give you a second. And then I'm going to show you. There you go. You thought long and hard about it. Do you know what happens? This is what happens. I'm not going to play it. I'm not going to play the full thing. But there you go. You see those people that were currently laying down? They weren't just laying down so they get a back massage. They were laying down because the jihadist groups that the United States funded to topple Bashar al-Assad was going to put a gun to their head and execute them for being Christians. Or execute them for not being part of the jihadist group that they're a part of now. Or not being Muslim enough. Not being the right Muslim. Here's more videos. This is what you get when you fund terrorist groups. Moderate Syrian rebels tie up a family and hold them as captives, insult them by referring to them as dogs. They're not from the original Shia. They're not Muslim enough, is what they're saying. Look how fucking disgusting this is. This is what happens when we allow our country, when we allow our leaders, the CIA, to fund fucking terrorist groups to topple regimes. We get to watch videos like this. And I can't even show the bad ones. I wish I could so you could fucking understand what happens. Look at them. Look at these people. We don't know what they've done. We don't know what they've done. But you know what their sin was? Not being Muslim enough. Not being fundamentalist enough. Not being a jihadist. This is the result of allowing our government to fund terrorists to topple regimes. And we can say it's on behalf of Israel. I don't even give a fuck about Israel. Maybe it is. Probably is. Regardless, this is what happens. This is what happens. So don't come to me and tell me the United States did not fund this, when we have literal proof of it. It's public knowledge. And guess what? These Christians and these Muslims that are getting executed for not being Muslim enough or being Christians, that blood is on American hands. That blood is on us for not stopping this government sooner. By allowing them to continue doing this in the Middle East. That blood is on our hands. Now, I'm not blaming everybody. I mean, there's only so much we can do. This is the best I can do, is yell at a computer that nobody even watches. That's the best I can do. I don't know what else to do. But it sickens me. Because this is what is the result of our country. This is what we do. We fund terrorist groups to slaughter Christians. That's what we do. The Al-Qaeda rebels torturing prisoners as soon as they find out they're Shia Muslims. So this is what happens. The Syrian Islamic rebels have kidnapped a large group of Kurdish women in Aleppo. This is no different than what the Yazidi, the ISIS did to the Yazidi women, and Hamas did to Israel. This is the result. Moderate rebel is winning the hearts and minds of Syrian minorities in the villages. I don't even know if I could play what that just was. I don't even want to play if more people are getting killed. A Syrian Christian woman was stopped at a checkpoint in Damascus and told by Islamic rebels that women are no longer allowed to leave the house without a male guardian, and that hijab is now mandatory. Syria is quickly becoming Afghanistan 2.0. That's what Trump said 11 years ago. Remember, all these freedom fighters in Syria want to fly planes into our buildings. The moment a Syrian Christian man was forced to convert to Islam by jihadist rebels, they kidnapped and threatened to kill him if he didn't. They're all laughing for forcing this man to convert. This is a result of U.S. foreign policy. Apparently, these jihadists are trying to fly a helicopter using YouTube. Breaking during the past 48 hours, Israel attacked 1,400 targets in Syria. Praying for all the Christians in Syria tonight. I'm just watching that stuff. Just, this is Syria in the 1970s, apparently. Thomas Massey trying to block aid to Syria, to aid the Syrian rebels back in 2013. This was when Operation Timber Sycamore was taking place, and Thomas Massey, one of the only congressmen with a spine that was trying to stop it. So yeah, guys, this is what happens. This is what happens. When we allow our leaders, when we allow people who aren't even elected to dictate foreign policy, who create programs like Timber Sycamore to funnel money to terrorist groups to topple a dictator, this is the result. You get to watch videos like that. And the only reason I'm watching them is so I can understand this is what my country does. This is the country I'm a part of. That people who profess their faith in Jesus Christ, just like I have, get gunned down in the streets because of America. The country that's supposed to represent Christ. That's supposed to be stewards of Jesus Christ and to spread his generosity around the world, around the planet. Instead, we do this. We topple the only Muslim leader in the region left that treats Christians okay enough to not kill them for the fact of being Christian. We replace him with people who want to chop their heads off. That's, instead of America spreading generosity and, the word of Jesus Christ around the world, we spread that. We spread Islamic terrorism. So, there you go. There you go. I got to turn my show into the saddest thing possible. Good thing there's barely anybody that watches, because it's a horrible subject to watch. Anyways, we're gonna go back to Piers Morgan and watch the stuff about Ukraine. I kind of want to hear a little bit about that. I don't even want to talk about Syria right now, because I'm gonna read this again just so I can edit it later. Timber Sycamore was a classified weapons supply and training program run by the United States Central Intelligence Agency and supported by the United Kingdom and some Arab intelligence services, including Saudi intelligence. The aim of the program was to remove Syrian President Bashar al-Assad from power. The aim of the program was to remove President Bashar al-Assad from power. Launched in 2012 or 2013, it supplied money, weaponry, and training to the Syrian opposition groups fighting Syrian government forces in the Syrian civil war. According to the U.S. officials, the program was run by the CIA's Special Activities Division and has trained thousands of rebels. President Barack Obama secretly authorized the CIA to begin arming Syria's embattled rebels in 2013. The program became public knowledge in mid-2016, so during the 2016 election. Back when when Trump was saying Obama created ISIS. One consequence of the program has been a flood of U.S. weapons, including assault rifles, mortars, and rocket-propelled grenades into the Middle East black market. Critics of the program within the Obama administration viewed it as ineffective and expensive, and raised concerns about seizure of weaponry by Islamic groups and about Timber Sycamore-backed rebels fighting alongside the al-Qaeda-affiliated al-Nusra Front and its allies. This kind of has a similar ring to when Obama was supplying weapons down south, and it got into the hands of the cartel, and then the cartel ended up killing a federal agent. If you remember that. Operation Fast and Furious, sound familiar? Well, this is Operation Timber Sycamore, the Middle Eastern version of Operation Fast and Furious. That's what foreign policy, U.S. foreign policy, everybody. All right. So we're going to get back to Scott Horton and General Wesley Clark. They're going to talk about Ukraine for a minute, and that's how we're going to end the show.
Because they simply can't get the manpower. And the reports that up to 2,000 Russians a day are being killed, which is staggering. You also have Zelensky, for the first time in the last week, clearly signaling that he is prepared to do a peace deal and inferring that as part of that, he accepts that Ukraine will have to cede some territory. So where do you think we're going to be with Ukraine, first of all, in the next 6 months?
Well, I'm really not sure. I definitely am very pleased to hear Donald Trump insist that we have to have a negotiated solution. All due respect to the general, when we were on last week, Cenk Younger asked, but General, what if Ukraine can't? And General Clark simply dismissed the premise of the question and said, nope, it's the Russians who must be made to fail. But the thing of it is that's really not based in reality. That's like saying, well, the Taliban just can't be allowed to win, or Ho Chi Minh just can't be allowed to win. They're going to win. And the question is how bad it's going to be. As everyone has agreed, including Biden, we're not sending the 82nd Airborne in there or the U.S. Navy to reverse Russian gains on the ground. There's no way we're willing to risk that level of war between NATO and the Russian Federation to reverse Russia's gains on the ground. And the Ukrainians don't have the manpower to do it. As even Kamala Harris has explained, Russia is a bigger country. They have more men, and they have not even engaged in a full-scale mobilization yet. They are, for public relations purposes, obviously keeping this a so-called police action, special military operation, not a full-scale war. They could escalate. They could expand conscription and escalate the war terribly.
Now, this is my viewpoint. I think the reason that the Russians did not care about Syria falling and they basically withdrew from Russia is because they are about to do a full-scale mobilization into Ukraine with the backing of China and Iran. And, of course, with the help from North Korea. I think what Scott Horton is saying here is what's about to happen. I think that's what it's about to happen.
Right now, Ukraine has lost 4 major oblasts, they call them, these large counties, basically, in the provinces in the far east and south of the country. And right now, Kharkiv is still in Ukrainian hands. Odessa is still in Ukrainian hands. And I would remind everyone, back in the fall of 22, the Ukrainians had a brilliant feint in Kherson, and then a major move, and they liberated all of Kharkiv Oblast and some of Luhansk. And this was the high watermark of Ukraine's effort in the war. And at that time, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, and the currently serving then chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, both said, negotiate now. Deal now while you're only this far behind and not worse. But they were overruled by the weenies, people like Antony Blinken and Jake Sullivan, who never been in a fight in their lives, who just said, no, we're going to do the escalation. We're going to do the winter surge. And then it became the spring surge. Sorry, they called it the escalation. And then they launched it in the summer, and it was a disaster. In the summer of 23, they didn't get anywhere, and it's been all downhill for them since then. And yes, the Russians are suffering horrible casualty rates. The war is an absolute horror show on the ground there, but the Ukrainians are too. And momentum is on the Russian side. So I know that the general is frustrated that America has to deal from a position of weakness here. But what are our other alternatives other than sending in Navy destroyers and the American Air Force and Army to reverse the gains on the ground, which I know that I can't imagine that he's in favor of doing.
General Clark, it's interesting. My brother was an Army colonel in the British Army for 35 years. And when I went to interview President Zelensky in about the four months after the war began in 2022, and I came back and I said, there is not a chance in hell these guys are going to give an inch to Putin. They're not going to cede an inch of land. And they shouldn't. And we had a very vigorous debate about this. And I said, why should anyone want a Russian dictator to be able to illegally invade a sovereign democratic European country and just take what he wants?
You don't have a choice. Either you have the power to defend your country and win a war, or you don't, and you lose. And you lose territory, and you start losing the war. That's called war, Pierce. That's how life works. You get in bed with certain people that pisses off your neighboring country, and they decide to invade you and take some of your territory. If you don't have the power to stop it, that's how it works.
And kill loads of people in the process. And he said, I'll tell you why. He said, because Putin has sold this to his people, that it was NATO encroachment and the threat of that, which is why he's doing this as a security operation to protect the national interest of Russia on its border. But secondly, he said he has overpowering military might, and ultimately that will mean that Ukraine cannot win this war. And I spoke to him yesterday, and I had to basically see that I feel like he's been proven right. Now, it may not look like a glorious victory for Russia, but ultimately it is highly likely, I would think, unless you think otherwise, that Ukraine is going to have to cede most, if not all, of the territory that Russia has taken, isn't it?
They will. It's not going to be a glorious victory for Russia, he's correct, but it will be a victory for Russia. Ukraine will not win this war. And if Ukraine has any desire to actually exist as a country and have any of its territory left, they better get out now. Because I promise you, it's not a good sign for them that Russia just let Syria fall and pulled out completely. That tells me they're about to mobilize for real. And you might lose it all. So, Zelensky, you have a choice to make. Do you want to keep sucking the teat of America and NATO and keep letting them bully you into, basically sacrificing the next generation of your people? Or do you want to be able to exist at all and go ahead and try to negotiate here? Because I think Putin's about to come for it all. I think he's going to launch a major mobilization before Trump takes office. I think that's what's happening.
Well, I don't think there's any reason, nor does it make a good negotiating posture to sort of advance this at this point. I think if you go back and look at this, first of all, the U.S. intelligence agencies failed from the beginning to really appreciate what was going on in Ukraine. We didn't have coverage. The diplomats didn't understand that Ukraine was a different country than Russia. Most of the people that studied the Soviet Union went to Moscow after the war. They didn't go to Ukraine. They took the Russian view of it. And so we had really sort of bad guidance at the outset. In 2014, the United States basically said, well, Ukraine can't defend itself. Just give up Crimea. We told them to give up Crimea. That wasn't enough. Putin then decided he would try to take Donbass. When I was over there on the 31st of March, 1st, 2nd, 3rd of April of 2014, Ukrainians came to me and said, we have 50,000 people. We stayed in Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia. We held those against the Party of Regents, which was the Yanukovych's party, the Russian party there. We defended it. We fought for 30 days. We stayed. We wouldn't let them have the administration. So there was a widespread effort. The United States really wasn't engaged in it, didn't understand it, didn't have much to do with it, really. Victoria Nuland sort of spoke out of turn. She got chastised for that. Obama was trying to use Putin to help with Iran. And suddenly this thing, pops up like, what the hell? We had already outsourced our foreign policy in Europe essentially to Angela Merkel. Angela Merkel, in the way the Europeans do, they sort of blunder in, well, let's all get together and share our interests. And
He's not talking
course,
about.
Putin is a
He's not stepping on any of the real reasons this happened. He's going into some hullabaloo bullshit because he really does not want to admit what Scott Horton is trying to get him to admit. That's very obvious.
Strategist. He's not an economist. He doesn't care about trade. He wants territory. And from the time he became the president in 2000, he wanted to take over the space of the Soviet Union. He still does. So there've been a lot of misestimates, and I wouldn't quote Mike Mullen or Mark Milley. Oh, they're both good.
It's so amazing he's trying to call this misestimates instead of a purposeful poking of the bear. I'm trying to find the right words, but we instigated it. This isn't a misjudgment. This was something orchestrated. There's a huge difference. Scott Horton tried to get him to admit it, and he just cannot do it.
Man, they weren't there. They weren't on the ground. They didn't see the intensity of the Ukrainians' resistance. As to what happens now, I think there's still determination in Ukraine to stay and fight. This is about whether there's going to be a Ukraine or not. Now, Putin does believe he's going to win. There's no doubt about that. He thinks that, and he's not going to say, oh, okay, I'm ready for negotiations.
He's going
I've
to
lost
win.
A few troops. This is Mother Russia. They lost half of Russia to the Germans. They still won. So he is fully engaged in this. And this is going to be the great challenge for Donald Trump. If he wants to make America great, he can't do it by sacrificing Europe, because Europe is the geostrategic prize that both Russia and...
How in the fuck is losing Ukraine sacrificing Europe? I'll tell you why. I can tell you why. I want others to explain it to me. I can tell you why, though. I understand why. The strategic interest and the fact that they lined their lives up, that Ukraine became a strategic interest, is their own fucking fault. That's not America's fault. There's a reason. It's called LNG. If you know what that stands for, go listen to Mike Benz does great at explaining all of this on the Sean Ryan show. He has a great explanation on that show. I can tell you exactly why losing Ukraine is a problem for these people, but it's not because we're going to lose Europe. It's because Europe has basically set up their entire economic infrastructure on the LNG in Ukraine. That was dumb. That was very dumb, especially when you were going to encroach on those borders and fuck with Russia. That's very dumb. I don't care. At this point, fuck Europe. That's how I feel. It's just like, it's very dumb for America to base its entire technological infrastructure on chips that are coming out of Southeast Asia. Also, very dumb. And it's going to come back to bite us, just like it's coming back to bite Europe for basing their entire energy infrastructure on Ukraine. It's dumb. You fuck around and you find out.
China crave. And Europe is there for the Americans right now. Now, you may not want to think in terms of geostrategy. Most Americans don't, but most of the rest of the world does. And so I think when Donald Trump is speaking, and I heard him speak on the last interview he made, and he talked about NATO, he sounds pretty strong. I think he's going to recognize that he's going to have to find a win-win solution out of this.
Right.
And it can't simply be that we abandon Ukraine. Putin wants all of Eastern Europe back, and he wants the rest of Europe neutralized. And look, Europe has population, it has technology, it has investment resources, it has markets, it's everything that's in the world. And believe me.
Okay. The way what he wants.
Democrat. Last week, he general's truncating all the antecedents, and there's a lot to argue about in terms of Putin's motives here. He just wants to retake all of Eastern Europe. Last week he said he has to go all the way to the Balkans, conquer the former Yugoslavia so he can fight China. I mean, I don't have any idea really why he thinks that, but there's really no reason to think that that's true. I mean, Vladimir Putin essentially is a bureaucrat, not a romantic. He's a technocrat.
Literally no reason to think that's true. He's completely right. What evidence has Putin give that I'm going to take everything, even the Balkans? Nothing. There's nothing. This isn't a Hitler scenario. Stop trying to compare Putin to Hitler. I'm not saying that Putin's a moral guy or even a good guy. But this ain't a Hitler scenario. It's not appeasement to recognize you're in a losing war that is actually hurting our strategic interests. Our strategic interests basically saying our resources and our future ability to fight a war for our own defense.
Who, as even the last chair of NATO said, he went to war to prevent the encroachment of NATO closer to his borders. And you don't have to agree. The book, again, is called Provoked, not Justified. You don't have to agree that he had the right to do what he did to understand that America engaged in reckless policies in Ukraine. Many scholars on the American side say it was the worst of all worlds. We promised them repeatedly, including in 21, we're going to bring you into NATO. We're going to bring you into NATO. We're going to increase and improve your interoperability between your military and ours, making them essentially a de facto member more and more, but without the war guarantee. So in other words, just getting them into worse trouble. And you know, there's a great journalist named Zach Dorfman who wrote a series at the beginning of the war based on CIA sources for Yahoo News. And the CIA sources told him, and these are the guys who were in charge of importing and distributing the American weapons. And he said, listen, the calibration is off. We keep trying to tell our bosses, to tell the politicians, all these weapons that we're pouring in, it's not enough to deter Putin, but it is enough to provoke him. We're essentially putting our friends in a position to get into a terrible fight that then we're not willing to help them truly win. And I have to point out here, Pierce, that the general again refused to answer the question about how this is actually supposed to work. As your brother-in-law, the military expert, says, they are overmatched on the battlefield. Even if Britain and Germany and Poland tried to intervene, it would take the United States of America, it would take the 82nd Airborne, the U.S. Air Force, and the U.S. Navy to reverse these gains. They tried putting in tanks, they tried putting in F-16s, they put in the HIMARS and the ATACMS and different weapon systems. That doesn't make the difference. And I'm sure you saw, guys, both of you, in the last week, the Associated Press had a story that said they've had 100,000 deserters on the Ukrainian side.
And Putin hasn't even fully mobilized yet. Understand that. Despite what media might tell you, all you fucking idiots out there who said, oh, Putin's lost his entire army. Oh my god, he's lost everything. He hasn't even fully mobilized. He hasn't even used all his resources. Everybody repeating this nonsense. My dad is in the military. And he tells me every day, I gotta hear these fucking idiots at work. These colonels and lieutenant colonels who think that Putin has wasted all his resources and Putin's losing the war. Fucking morons.
Their casualties are roughly equivalent to the Russian casualties. We don't know for sure. Both sides embellish the others and play down their own. But they have suffered inordinate casualties, and you have American politicians demanding that they lower the conscription age and lower the age at which they send boys to go to the front line to die. And so to just dismiss Mark Milley, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time and had access to every last bit of classified data about what was going on in the war.
And a traitor.
And say, well, he just didn't understand the high morale that the Ukrainian forces on the ground have, and that's what makes the difference. And that's just a pipe dream. This is literally no different, Pierce, than if 10 years ago Clark had said, and I'm not saying he did, I don't remember his position at the time, but if anyone else had said 10 years ago that no, the surge in Afghanistan is going to work, And the Taliban, they just must not be allowed to win. Why? If they win, just think about their appetite. They might go to Tajikistan next. You can make up whatever you want about it, but the reality was that the coalition that America built in Kabul was never going to be able to keep the Pashtun plurality down. Just like the coalition we put together here is not able to hold off the Russians.
Yep. In fact, he's completely right about that. The coalition that we built in Kabul, Afghanistan, they required American support even if we left. They were still going to need American air support. When we withdrew that support, guess what happened? The Taliban took over. He's completely correct. Completely correct. They need American support or it's a losing situation. So why the fuck are we even doing it? The only way this wins, the only way Ukraine turns out in favor of Ukraine is for America to get involved. And I'm sorry, we don't support that. Fuck Ukraine. That's where I'm going to end it. And I don't mean like, I'm sure there's great Ukrainian people. I'm not fighting your war, dude. We're not doing it. I don't want to send my brothers and sisters. I was in the military. I got family in the military. I don't want to send them to go fight for you. Get over it. You're not obligated to our service. That's how it works. You shouldn't have poked the bear. Anyways, that's the show for tonight. Anybody that comes back and watches this, I'm going to be making clips of a lot of this. Thank you for watching. If anybody is in here, I think there's a couple of lurkers in here. I appreciate you. Anybody that comes back and watches this show, please leave a like and subscribe. I appreciate it. Have a wonderful day, and see you next time.